Well, this is my baby sister, Lucille. And I'll never forget the day that Mother told me she was expecting. I was 16 years old. 15 years old. And we were getting ready to go to Salt Air, and Mother said, I have something to tell you, Dora. And she told me that she was expecting a baby. From that second, I was just off on cloud nine, because that was the most heavenly news I could ever hear. I loved a baby, and 15 years raised by myself. So here's my little sister, Lucille.
Hi.
So we went to Salt Air, and honestly, from that minute on until she was born, it was just a different world. We were so worried about Mother that she maybe wouldn't come through, and 50 million things. But anyway, we were so thrilled about this baby that's sitting next to me. And she was a darling. So, Lucille.
I was definitely bald in the picture. Very little hair.
But she was so cute. She would, I don't think Papa liked this too much, but Lucille, we would stand her up on the piano bench, and I would play, My Old Man is a Fine Old Man.
A poor old man.
Poor old man.
He washed his face in a frying pan, combed his hair with a wagon wheel, and died with the toothache in his heel.
And Lucille was so tiny, we would put her up on the piano bench, and it was so cute when she would sing that song. But I think Papa took the words a tiny bit too seriously. I got that impression. But anyway, so Lucille, let's pick up. Yes, you grew up, and I tried to tell Mother how to raise you and who you should go out with and who you shouldn't go out with.
I remember very well. I resented that.
I used to stand in the hall, and Renee, she would climb wherever she could get that toe. And I would reach from the hall through the kitchen, into the refrigerator, into the bedrooms, into the bathroom, into the living room. All the time I was handing out Mother some very good advice, where she never seemed to quite appreciate. So, Lucille, from then on, what do you remember?
Well, I guess Mother and I had pretty much of a hardship life, I guess, but Mother always laughed and said that it was fun, and she always made life fun. I remember the times that she would stand out on the sidewalk and once in a while beg for a dime to buy a can of milk. And it was very embarrassing for Mother, but she had the strength and the ability to smile and tell them that she needed to buy her little girl a can of milk for her mush. I remember many a time we had cornmeal mush for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And Mother would sit there, and of course I hated canned milk and I hated cornmeal mush, and I'd look at her and she looked like she was enjoying it so much that I thought, well, if she can eat it, I guess I can. So we survived. And then she'd get out and work hard in her yard and dig like nobody's business, and I often think of her when I get out in my yard. I thought, boy, when I grow up, I won't do that, but it seems like that you always fall back to the way your parents were and enjoy it.
And I'll never forget when we picked up the newspaper, and right in the whole the whole half of the front page was of Mother finishing her cement porch. And you know, I lived
up on the
over
rooftop, putting on
Right.
the chimney, and it embarrassed my big
Oh,
sister to death. She
Lucille, you
thought
are
that
right.
was so humiliating. And Mr. Goldbrownson would stand down on the sidewalk. Mrs. Thorne, you gonna fall off that roof? And Mother would laugh at him, and she'd stand up and put her hands down her overalls, and they were too big.
Yeah.
But she could put both arms down and push them out, and then she'd stand up there and just dare Mr. Goldbrownson that she wouldn't roll off the roof. so it was quite exciting times. So we thought it was quite amusing, but my big sister here, she thought that was the most embarrassing thing that Mother could have ever done to her.
You know, I really did, Lucille. I really did.
Yeah.
Just shows you how you can change your way of thinking.
Well, I remember the times that Mother and I used to walk clear from down on 960 South 8th East, clear on down to 9th South, down 9th South to West Temple, and up West Temple to the Salt Lake City Market. We'd usually leave around 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And then we'd load our little wagon, and Mother had taken some 2x4s and made an extra broad wagon to pack all this produce in. And then on the way home, I would take one side of the street and she'd take the other, and we'd peddle these groceries. And then when we got home, whatever was remaining is what we had for supper. And the next morning we'd start out again, just the same old way. And then Mother had to go down to Liberty Park, and I had a little hatchet. It wasn't so big. And Mother, we'd chop our wood and store it in the wood bins. And Mother was so diligent about every stick of wood had to be stacked just so that if anyone looked in that wood bin, it wasn't topsy-turvy or it wasn't going to fall out. Which I thought Mother was a little too particular about her wood bin. But she always had plenty of storage of wood and coal during the winter months. And we survived. We had a lot of fun. And as I look back now, and I think of how babied my children have been and how spoiled they have been, if any of them had to go back to those days, I don't think they could survive it.
Well, they would, Lucille, because they would have to. Many things in this life are not your choice.
Well, that's true.
So it's a matter of, but how different. I've often thought our side of the family were brawn, and Ralph's side of the family were brains, because they had plenty of money to live from day to day. So no wonder we had a few differences, but Ralph and I had the most priceless part of a lifetime. We loved our family and we enjoyed them, and we had fun with them. So Roger, do you want to take some of these pictures that bring back so many memories now, or do you want to take them later?
I'll get them later.
Okay. But anyway, here's pictures of Lucille's wedding. Brings back many memories. The little dress that Mother's wearing, Ralph's mother paid for. Because Mother really did live the lean years.
But she was totally happy.
But she was a happy person.
She never let anything get her down. She always used to say to me, well, she says, you know, there's one thing always remember. You can't live in the past. Take care of today and do the best you can. And don't worry about tomorrow. And that has stuck through thick and thin with me.
And the thing that has been important to me is don't start something new until you have finished what you started.
That is true.
And I think
That is
that's
very
one of
true.
the most timely things to remember. But Mother was a go-getter. Everyone loved her. And she was little, but she was sure mighty. So anyway, here are more pictures of our youth, and Ralph is a sign painter. Boyd's gravel truck. The barn. Where was this taken, Lucille?
That was taken out on 47th South and about 25th West.
And the horses. And Boyd and Lucille, and the mountains where Wayne and Roger used to hike up and have so much fun.
Do you remember anything about your dad, Lucille?
Well, I remember very little about my father. I remember a couple of times that Dad did put me up on his shoulders. And then when I was around 7 years old, I had several visits from my father at the Hamilton School. And as I look back, I can see where he wanted to have a little association with me, but through a little misfortune in Mother's life and Dad's life, why, they did separate. And of course, Mother was always afraid that Dad was going to kidnap me, and had more or less feared in my mind that maybe he would try to, against my will, take me away. So therefore, I never got close to Dad's car, and I talked to him from a distance. And sometimes you look back over those times and you realize that he just wanted a little time to say hello. So we live and learn from a lot of experiences that we have.
That's right.
So,
And a child's environment is so important. And you look back and you just can't help thinking, well, if maybe we should have done the other thing, I wonder what our lives would have been today. You wonder.
that is quite true.
Did that about the toads?
The toads were so thick down there that you couldn't find a place to put your foot.
On the west side?
On the west side. And I had such a horror. The kids in those days were cruel. I remember they put a nail in the end of a board, and they would go and kill these toads with that stick. Isn't it? Things like that just stick in your memory.
Haunt you.
And they used to deliver coal. And they would beat the horses until I would just beat my head. It affected me so. How cruel they were backing the coal wagon up to the coal shed or whatever. The kids were mean. They were mean to cats. We had a kid in our neighborhood that, Ernie, and I never could stand the name of Ernie. But I know Ernie provoked me so much one day that I crawled off the little tricycle I had borrowed to ride, and I got a hold of his curly head, and I really gave that kid a beating. I bet he remembers it to this day. Roland says I'm part man, but I really could climb the fence and the coal shed better than any boy you ever saw.
As I remember my mother, she always was a fabulous cook.
Mm-hmm.
She worked in the home of Senator C.E. Luce in Provo for years and cooked.
And Dr. Allen.
And Dr. Allen. And she did some marvelous cooking. She just had a gift that was just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And Mother made some of the most delicious rolls. I wished I'd taken the recipes.
Yes, they were.
Because they were so light and they were so yummy, and they were always just cooked just right. And also another thing in the line of baking, every time it come Dora's birthday, Mother would make this huge fruit cake. Of course, I hated raisins and I hated dried fruit, and I couldn't stand fruit cake.
I couldn't either.
But Mother would make this lovely fruit cake, and now that I'm older, I crave that fruit cake like you can't believe.
I do too.
Because it was good.
Roger's former girlfriend's mother, Gladys, brings me over a fruit cake every birthday because I happen to say that Mother made me a fruit cake on my birthday. You know, that's real friendship. And to this day, I'll find a cake in the door.
How cute.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it's real interesting to say this. Roger's father was a railroad conductor, and Papa was a streetcar conductor. And of all things in the world, Papa died at 7 o'clock, about 7 o'clock one evening. And we had just moved, and we didn't have a key to the front door. So Uncle Clarence had to raise the window to give us the message of Papa's passing away. And 7 o'clock the next morning, John knocked on the same window, raised the same window, and told us that Mr. Sinister passed away. So this was just days before Wayne was born, and we both lost our fathers. 2 funerals in a week.
And Wayne was born the next morning after?
No, it
wasn't
was. No.
Was it longer?
Longer, Lucille. I don't remember the date that Papa died, but it was longer than that.
Oh.
But days, just days.
Mm-hmm.
And Wayne was born on January the 29th.
Mm-hmm.
So Papa passed away before Christmas. If that part of my mind is just a complete blank.
After Christmas, my dear.
And Papa had let the insurance lapse. He had taken it out of Mother's name. And if he had lived another, I think it was 9 or 12 hours, the insurance would have lapsed.
Wouldn't have been any good.
But as it was, Lucille's money and part of my money went for the sidewalk of the road out in front on 8th East. So we look back on these days, and Mother always just seemed to be so happy. She'd say, well, she had it so much better than her parents. And life goes on. I have it so much better than Mother. And my life was so different than Lucille's because I was an only child, but Lucille was raised more or less without a father.
What was your mom's viewpoint on religion?
Mother was very, very religious in heart. But she became quite bitter when Dad returned from his mission and more or less another woman stepped into the picture. But I think as Mother went through life, Mother was quite faithful in her beliefs. She hated a lie worse than strychnine. And she raised me the best she knew how. And one thing that she would really turn over nowadays if she heard the slang that's used amongst the young people. Because that's one thing Mother says was wasted words. You never swear. You never say ill language because she says it degraded you.
You know, when I was in high school, I thought it was kind of smart to use a little bit of slang. And, oh, that irritated Mother. Mother would say, a slang always comes from something very dirty. Remember that. I'll never forget it.
And another thing, as I was dating, that I think Mother had a very strong outlook. She never told me I couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
She'd always say, Lucille, I wouldn't do that, but you do what you want. And I know by her saying those words, I was on guard.
I was too.
But if Mother had a stood toe to toenail with me and said, you
this.
can't do it, I think I would have been a little objectional.
Uh-huh.
But she always would say, well, Lucille, I wouldn't go out with that guy, but you do what you want to do. And so, of course, I went out with the guy, and I found out she was right, very right.
That was one thing. Mother could foretell the weather. She would see a cloud, a teeny tiny cloud off in the distance. And of course we were always going to go to Salt Air. And she'd say, well, it's going to rain this afternoon. And I would get so mad. But sure enough, just as sure as she said it was going to rain that afternoon, it would. And I know she would foretell things that to me were just absolutely uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing What was I going to say? I would
One
get
thing that Mother used to do on Decoration Day, especially since Decoration Day is just around the corner, Mother used to take me and we'd go up to the city cemetery. Of course, we'd visit Grandmother's grave. That was her mother's grave. And then we would waltz over and see my dad's grave. And then we'd take off and we'd go down to, I think it was South Temple and something west, and catch the open air Salt Air train and go out to Salt Air. And we'd have a great big day. And Mother'd say, well, we go to the cemetery, pick up the spirit, and then we take them out for a good time today. And we did that every solitary Decoration Day that I can remember. And right to this day, on Decoration Day, that's exactly where I want to head, is out to Salt Air, but this year it's out in the water.
that brings, yeah. Oh, it's a total mess. It must have been on Decoration Day. Mother would walk me up 5th South to Mount Olivet Cemetery. And you know, I enjoyed that so much. We went past the brewery. What brewery was it? It burnt down. Oh boy, what a fire that night. But anyway, it's the old Salt Lake Jail now, restaurant.
It's a restaurant.
I haven't been there.
Oh, it's a nice place to go.
Oh.
You have to go and sit in jail and eat your dinner for one experience.
Really?
You bet that's a lot of fun. They even have the sheriff come up and try to arrest you and
Do they?
put you in bars, and they're really quite cute. They're a lot of fun. A lot of quaint things in there. Say. Well, my husband has really had his share of tragedies in life. It seems like that I thought I was marrying a guy that would be able to dance until he was 98 or 100. And to my living surprise, I found out that my very well healthy man that I thought I had married was really quite an ill person. At least he's been through about 8 major operations, and heavens only knows how many more are coming. But I always joke with him, and I always say, well, for every operation I just gain another 1/4 of a head of hair gray. And he doesn't like that. He hates gray hair. And I tried to pacify his notions one time by going and having my hair dyed. And the beautician put jet black on me, and of course when I come home he just about fell over because he felt it made me look very hard and very white and very peaked, and he didn't like that either. So then I went to a lighter color, and he wasn't too crazy about that either, so I let it grow gray again. But he's a good guy in many ways.
He is a good guy.
He's a little stubborn, the Swedish attitude.
And he has been raised on a farm.
Definitely. His mother always told me, well, Boyd should have married a farm girl because you city dudes. And I was always proving myself that these city dudes were 10 times better than the farm girl. And I think I convinced her toward the latter part of her life that I was the best one of the group after all. And like I say, Boyd likes to build. He's a carpenter, and I guess he'll build until his last day. If it isn't one thing, it's another. He's built a cabin.
And what he built out of that barracks, Lucille.
Yes.
Every time
Yes,
I go
that's
by
true.
Dolores' house, I think of that was also a,
Very true.
barracks.
Yeah.
And what Boyd did with that barracks, really,
Made it into a nice home.
it was a lovely home.
Yeah. And we had a lot of fun memories out there. Of course, when the cow chased me and I tried to stop it from going out in the street, which my husband told me, if that cow ever gets loose, grab the rope. Well, I grabbed the rope and it slipped knot around my foot, and down I went, and he headed out for the road, over into the gravel pit road, and there I was on my belly, and my knees and my face, my elbows was like hamburger, And luck enough, Mr. and Mrs. Youngberg, Boyd's father and mother, they had an old piece of fence, and the cow made a swift turn and ran into the fence and couldn't go any further. So I was able to release the knot from my ankle, and I hobbled back to the house, and I looked like a bunch of chewed up meat. But anyway, I survived that, but I'll never grab a rope of a cow again, because I never realized my 98 pounds against 2,000 some odd pounds, how tragic it can become.
But remember the carp that Wayne used to get out in the ditch?
Oh, do
They
I
come down in
remember
the
that?
irrigation
You bet.
ditch.
Wayne and Roger, I can't recall whether Roger was there that one particular day. But anyway, Wayne had come out to visit me. And he went out in the ditch and brought these carp in. And I didn't realize where he'd put these carp, but he put them in my bathtub. And they were splashing and they were jumping out of my tub onto the floor. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. And then the next surprise, he went out and got a water snake and brought it in a bottle, and the bloomin' thing got loose. What a heyday we had.
It was nothing, Lucille. Wayne brought home a snake one day, and we got up the next morning, and there was nothing but just a swarm of little baby snakes. I don't know how many there were, but there must have been a lot of them.
And then I remember you saying, well, Lucille, you know, I never used to like snakes, but they're kind of cute little characters.
You know, I have honestly grown.
Those slimy, creepy things, I hate them to this day.
Aunt Dinah would talk about snakes, and she said, they're not cold like people say. Slimy and cold. She says they're as warm as they can be. But Aunt Dinah liked snakes.
Dear.
Priceless memories. And that's another thing Aunt Dinah said. Even you just have to have love. She says, even if it's just the love of a dog.
And that's quite true.
And I thought of that so many times. And another thing she said, a child is only given to you, is only loaned to you to raise. Remember that.
Well, today is May 16th, and I'm getting Mom down here, sitting her down so she can tell us a little bit about her personal history. Can you fill us in a little bit?
Okay, Roger, here goes. Write that book at 84 and a half. It's becoming more and more of a reality that just started out with a joke. But first the tune, then the count, nod your head, push your knee, tap your toe, and first thing you know, it's easy as easy can be. Isn't that so? Well, starting out with my history, I'm very proud of my heritage because I am a true pioneer daughter. And it all started with Grandfather. He came over in this valley as a baby. And then as a young man, I heard that he was a very wild young man and a fighter. Everyone was frightened to death of him because he had such a temper. Little tidbits of information. But that was my grandfather Thorne. He married and had my father and Uncle Will. And then his first wife died after childbirth and left a tiny baby that had a cleft palate. And the poor little thing just cried itself to death. Then he married his wife's sister, and they had 5 children. Aunt Delilah, Aunt Hazel, Aunt Chloe, Uncle Leo, and Uncle Silas. So we really had a very happy family association, a wonderful association. In fact, I've wanted so much to follow in their footsteps. There was never any discord, it seemed like, in the family. Well, their property in Pleasant Grove was, I understand, the fort from the Indians. So that piece of property in Pleasant Grove is a piece of history. Grandmother and grandfather were tremendous people. My grandfather was a very quiet man, but he took me riding in the buggy, and I think I was lucky. I had a little closer association than the other children, being the first grandchild. So I've been a very fortunate, loved child all my life, and I think it has affected me. Then my grandfather Holdaway, on mother's side of the family, raised very special horses, and he owned the longest maned horse in the world, which he took on tour in fact, he died when he was on tour with this horse, and the horse's name was White Cloud. There's so many things I wish so much I had to fill in, but he married my grandmother Anderson, and she was a very pretty horsewoman, I understand, and she had beautiful horse riding costumes. It was so funny. I was married when I run into my neighbor that used to know her very well, and she used to be in the parades. And this lady, my neighbor, told me about my grandmother. So grandmother was a weaver in Provo, and she married my grandfather Holdaway. But when my Aunt Vera, the fifth child, was expected, he really fell in love with another woman, and grandmother just could never accept a polygamy, another wife in polygamy. So they got a divorce, and she went to Oregon, and the family home burnt down. Apparently they were really quite well fixed. They had a piano and a big swing out in front that Mother used to talk about. But it just seemed like they met a streak of ill luck. So grandmother went on being a divorcee, and she raised my Aunt Vera. But from then on, she lived her life alone as a single woman. I have very little information about my folks, really, when I come to think about it. But my first memory was Mother hemming me in with chairs. That was when we moved over on the west side, just 2 blocks north of the fairgrounds. And I guess that's where my memory starts. So they bought that home there. Can't even remember the address of it. Mother had me all, as a tiny child, memorize it. But anyway, in many later years, I found out that Ralph was living just about 4 blocks east of us at that location. Isn't it funny how a person's paths cross before you know it? So anyway, I remember the buggy and horse days. I remember when they came in with a buggy and horse. And I have slight memories of some of these pictures I see of the Eagle Gate and the monument. But then my mind goes sort of blank until we moved up on Windsor Street. And there I started school, learned to skate, got my first sled, and I was a real pal with my father. I was very close to my father and mother. We were a threesome that was just super. We had so much fun together. Papa got a season ticket to the Wilkes Theater. We went every week. He got a job as a streetcar conductor. And our life ran very smoothly. We got our piano when I was about 8 years old, and that was a big thrill in my lifetime. Before that, we got our phonograph, and I used to picture myself as some famous opera singer. I'd stand at the side of the graffanola, we called it, and sing to my heart's content. Childhood dreams. I was always going to be a great dancer and a famous singer. Mother had a beautiful voice. And I used to love to have her sing to me. Mother had a beautiful voice, and she was such an admirer of, the Gates family. I can't remember. But anyway, I started school there, and I had a very fun childhood. I was close to my cousins. I adored them. We used to walk down to Aunt Zina's on 9th South. And the winters then were so cold, the snow would just creak under your feet. That isn't so nowadays. All right, now let's see, where do I take off from there? Well, we moved from Windsor, which broke my heart. We moved from the Webster School into the Hamilton, and to a home that I never did care for. I loved the barn that was in the backyard, and I loved the cherry tree at the side of the house. But I never cared for that house very much. I just didn't like it very well.
Was that the one on 8th East?
That was the one on 8th East,
What was the address?
That was 954 South 8th East. Wow. And then, of course, that is where Daddy courted me. And my teen years, yes, the biggest part of my life was there on 8th East. I had girlfriends galore. We all took piano lessons. We had a great time. There were about 5 of us. And we did have fun. We went to Peter Rabbit Club every Saturday at the Pantages Theater. And then I went to high school there and enjoyed Liberty Park. It was just 2 blocks away, and the animals would roar so much at night that it could be a little frightening. You felt like they were getting out of their cages. Then I started to go out a little bit, and then I met Daddy through a blind date, through my best girlfriend, and the 4 of us went out a great deal together. Salt Air, Lagoon, dances every Saturday night, which were just the most wonderful memory of a lifetime. The big imitation Yellow Moon in the ballroom with a fellow we used to call Jigs playing the banjo. But what wonderful memories. We used to have so much fun dancing. And then it got a little serious, and Daddy come into the picture, and he went to Denver. He was a great man to travel. The Sisters were railroad people, And so they got to take many trips. Daddy was always after me to go to California, and I tied him down. I wouldn't let him go because I couldn't leave my parents. And have often wondered whether it would have been the best thing for us to reach out and stand on our own 2 feet, or whether we would have been weaklings and stayed there a couple of weeks and spent all our money and come home dead broke again. I was born in Pleasant Grove, and in the little home in back of the Thorne home. And this is on the piece of property that I understand was the fort. We just lived in Pleasant Grove just for a few weeks. Mom and Papa came to Salt Lake when I was a very small baby. But anyway, I was born on the 23rd of December, and a little girl was born across the street on the 25th on Christmas. And to this day, she's still alive. I received a letter from her, and Evelyn and I still correspond.
What's your last name?
Evelyn Adams Robbins. And I've been going to call her because that girl has lived with a bad heart all her life, but she's still alive. So we have corresponded and been lifetime friends. Pleasant Grove was just the most delightful little country town you've ever seen. It had mint along the ditch. I had to jump the ditch to go over to Evelyn's. And it smelled so good. And those pretty black and white and brown and white cows going down the country road in the early morning, and the smell of that mint is still so vivid in my memory. In fact, I have mint down on the stream, and it always reminds me of Pleasant Grove. In fact, my home is so loaded with memories. How could I ever leave it? Can't. I don't think I'm going to. Let's see. Mother named me Dora Thorne after a play they saw, and Mother so fell in love with a little actress that she named me Dora Thorne. And Daddy, Ralph, put himself out to find that book. He searched, I guess, every bookstore in Salt Lake. He finally found the book, and believe it or not, I haven't got it. It was a little paperback volume. But this is what happens.
What was the name of the play?
What?
What was the name of the book?
Dora Thorne. Dora Thorne. But in the book, when I read the book, it spoiled my name, because in the story, the real story, the boy is of an educated family, and he marries this little girl that is very illiterate, and in the end she goes and drowns herself in the lake because she loves this fellow so much, but she is so beneath his standing that it was not a happy marriage. So the story was so different than the play my mother saw. I don't know what else to say except, Roger, all Mother's very, very valuable things were swept up by the DI from lack of time, too busy with my little young family to take care of real heirlooms.
What's your most vivid memory of your dad? He used to carry you
Oh,
on his
my
shoulder.
dad was my best friend. He was my pal. He carried me on his shoulders. I can still feel the lope of his walk. I used to go to sleep on his shoulder. That is the fun of being an only child. Your mother and your dad so adore you that if anything, you're smothered with love. My dad was my pal. I was up on the roof with him. I was on the other end of the board. When he was sawing it, I was my father's pal. Wherever Dad went, I was right there. And I love my mother and my father so equally that it just broke my heart when they got a divorce. I could never see one without the other. They were a cute couple, and I guess I've lived my life with their image in my memory. Let's see, what else can I say? Mother was just so dear. It taught me to crochet and sew and embroider. And grandmother made my rag doll. I just had an ideal childhood. We went to Pleasant Grove every 10th day when Papa would have his free day from work. And of course we were so proud in our new Ford. And then Lucille came along. And Lucille had an awful lot of colic when she was a tiny baby. But I think a lot of it was caused from riding in that breezy car. But Lucille was a darling baby. And there was 16 years difference in Lucille and I. So Lucille has, in a way, been more like a daughter than a sister. But we've had our children together and have so much in common. We both had 4 children, all very much the same age. And she was a pal to Wayne. She was like a big sister to Wayne. And she's been an adorable sister. Mother taught her to always think of me. And she's been just that, very thoughtful. Always included me in everything.